Hey, it's Jackie with Unique in the Creek, and we're going to make a super fun watermelon wreath. For your materials, you are going to need the Measure Buddy. Measure Buddy is a super great tool. You can extend it out to cut your ribbon. It is available for purchase at uniqueinthecreek.com. Next up, you're going to need a watermelon sign. This one in particular is metal. You're also going to need the rectangular board. And you're going to need 2 of them for this project. Next up, you are going to need some mesh. I love the look of border mesh on projects. It's one of my favorite meshes to use. We're going to need some pipe cleaners, some zip ties, and your choice of ribbons. For this project, I want to use 4 ribbons. All your supplies are available at uniqueinthecreek.com. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is take your zip ties, and we're going to zip tie our boards together side by side. Now, when you put your zip ties in, we're going to use 3 of them, 1 at each end. These zip ties are only about 7 inches long. They're 8-pound test is what they call them. And you want to make sure that you tighten these down as tight as possible so that when you're done putting your zip ties in, you'll end up having one board and it's rigid as possible and it won't bend in the middle. There's neat tools that you can use to help with zip ties and cutting the ties. There's a zip tie gun. When you go to uniqueinthecreek.com, Laurie has a list of her favorite tools, and under her favorite tools, you will find a zip tie gun. So now that we got our zip ties on and they're tight enough and our boards are rigid and they're not going to bend in the center, let's get those cut off. So now we are ready to add on our pipe cleaners. Now for this part, you're going to need 12 of them. We're going to start putting our pipe cleaners down the center, and as we do that, we're going to skip every 2 holes as we add our pipe cleaners, and that's going to give you a total of 12 pipe cleaners. Now, for a more experienced person that is used to using Unique in the Creek boards, you might choose to use zip ties for this project. But I would recommend that if you're going to use zip ties, that you watch the whole tutorial first and then adapt it to using zip ties. Now we're going to go to the outside of the board and add our pipe cleaners. And as I'm adding my pipe cleaner, I am twisting it around over the top of the outside hole. The reason that I'm doing that is because I want as much distance from the center tie to my outside ties as possible. Ideal placement for your mesh and your ties is about 5 inches apart. That gives you a good overlap for your mesh. And what I did there was I went ahead and just folded all my pipe cleaners in half. As you can see, it just makes it easier to flip the board over and load them right in so that when you're done, you just flip it all over and tie them in place. And then after that, it kind of goes pretty quick. So like I said, it's a total of 12 pipe cleaners, which means that it's not going to take that much mesh to fill this out. Now that we've loaded on all our pipe cleaners, let's get our mesh cut. Now I chose to cut my mesh 30 inches. I like a super thick, lush wreath. If you want to save on mesh, I recommend that you just cut it 20 inches. That's all you really need. But if you cut it 30 inches, it will use the whole roll. Now what I like to do, because this mesh does fray a little bit, some people call doing this a kerfuffle when you do this, but I like to open all my ties. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of roll my mesh under just a little bit. And that's just to prevent any fraying or anything like that. And then we're just going to ruffle, ruffle, ruffle. I call this the roll and ruffle. And like I said, it's just to prevent my mesh from fraying. Then when you put it in the pipe cleaner, you're going to want to twist your pipe cleaner, 2 or 3 times to make sure your mesh isn't going to come out. One more time as I lay the second piece. Roll your mesh. You're just going to roll it like 1 or 2 times, doesn't matter, just enough to stop them from fraying, and then ruffle away. And as you notice, I'll take my hand and I'll roll my end in just a little bit, and I'm going to place it in my tie, and we're just going to go all the way down the center of the board first. All right, after this, let's speed it up a bit. I think y'all know what I'm talking about by now, so let's just get that mesh on that board. As we go down the center, we'll finish up down the center, and then we're going to quickly go down each side. If you will notice, I'm not fluffing my mesh up. I'm just laying it down directly on top of each other. It's really not necessary to like poof it up or anything like that, because as you will see when I'm done, it's going to make a really beautiful base. And you'll be really happy with the results. This border mesh is just amazing. And there are several different styles of border mesh available at uniqueinthecreek.com. I love the new ones that are out now, and I can't wait to use them myself. You'll notice as I go to the corners, though, I'm kind of pointing it out to the corner edge a little bit with my pipe cleaner, and that's just to give more depth to my wreath. So we're just about done putting our mesh on, and as you can see, it is turning out to be a really beautiful wreath base. I'm liking the shape of this because it's not quite a square, not quite rectangular, but it is somewhere in between, which makes it super nice. As you can see, if you do follow us on Facebook, if you will type in !notify, next time any of us is live on Facebook, you will receive notifications to let you know when we are live. Now that we're done with the wreath base, let's get our measure buddy out and put our ribbons on. The measure buddy will measure your 14-inch ribbons. We're going to need, in this case, I'm going to use a 1.5 and a 2.5. We're going to need 10 of each ribbon. Now we're not going to put the ribbons down the center of our wreath. That's not necessary. I love the look of this watermelon ribbon. It is so bright and crisp. I use my bucket to put my ribbon tails in. It just makes it easier to throw them away instead of wiping them off my workplace. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our 2.5 and 1.5 and we're going to put one in each tie around the outside. And what I like to do is separate my ribbons out. As you can see, my tails are pretty far apart. When I do that, I just love the way that it looks overall. And it makes it so you can see each of the ribbons that I'm using. When I tie my ribbons in with my pipe cleaner, as you can see, I also give it a couple of twists. Alright, let's speed this up so we can get those ribbons in. The better the ribbon that you use, better quality that you use, the better your ribbons will lay in your project. Using wired ribbon is really the only way to go. Ribbon that isn't wired is not going to lay nice at all in your projects. So yes, it has to be wired ribbon that you use. Now that we got our ribbon in, I'm actually going to show you something really neat. So let's get our measure buddy back out. I'm going to show you how to make a bow with your measure buddy. This is actually a perfect technique for a beginner. So what I'm doing here is I'm using my measure buddy to decide how big I want my bow to be. You have all your measurements there. So I've decided that I want my bow to be 12 inches in overall length, or my loops will be 6 inches each. So now that I've decided how big I want my bow to be, we are ready to get started. So I decided that I want my loops to be 6 inches each, or you're going to wrap it 12 inches overall. You want to take your ribbon and you want to place it a little bit over halfway so that when you put your pipe cleaner in, it's going to grab all your ribbon. And now you want to take and you want to wrap your ribbon around twice. There's one loop. There's 2 loops. And now what you want to do is go just over center again with your tail. And then cut your ribbon off. Now the easiest way to get your ribbon off is to take your ribbon buddy. I just kind of like give it a little pop and it just kind of like goes down 1 inch, which is going to end up being perfect because for our next set we're going to go down 1 inch. So this set of ribbons is 12 inches overall length. And we're going to take and we are going to fold those directly in half. Make sure that each side is even. And then we are going to cut a notch, not go all the way through, but just a little bit, like about 1/4 of an inch in. So as we lay that out, we're going to take our pipe cleaner And as you can see, we're just going to fold it up through our notches. And then we are going to set that one aside. And make our next set of loops. So for our next set of loops, we're going to go down to 11 inches. And you can do this however you want. You can use a 2.5 ribbon next. This is just what I chose to do for the look that I wanted for my bow. So now I'm going to use a 1.5 ribbon. And once again, we're going to loop this around twice. Now, if you are a little bit more advanced wreath maker, you might want to get a easy bow maker, and they are still all available at Unique in the Creek. The Stow and Go. Once again, we're going to cut those little notches. Those notches are just going to make it easier for us to gather our ribbon up later. This technique is also awesome for people that have trouble using their hands and gripping things because they're not having to do a pinch and a twist on the ribbon. So for our next set of loops, we're going to go down to 10 inches. So with each set of loops as we go up, I like to knock it down an inch. That way each ribbon stands out nicely as we go. And once again, we're going to do another 2 loops. I just wanted to keep this basic, easy, and simple to follow for a beginner making their first bow with the Measure Buddy. And as you can see, it pretty much so goes the same each time. You fold it in half and then make sure you find your center and then cut your notches. The scissors that I'm using, I do recommend a good titanium scissor. They do not dull as fast as your other scissors, and that is what I use. So we are on our last set of loops, and we're going to do it 9 inches. Once again, when you're using your ribbon to make a bow, your ribbon has to be wired to make a real pretty bow, because when you go to fluff your bow, if your ribbon is not wired, it's not going to make nice rounded loops. So let's cut our final notches for the top part of our bow. So now that we have that in there, we want to crisscross our pipe cleaner and tighten our pipe cleaner up, because we want this to pinch in. See how it pinches in? The more that it pinches in, the prettier your bow is, and the easier that, and the better that it will fluff out. So we're going to take our pipe cleaner and we're going to pull it back through our notches and down to the bottom. And the reason we're doing that is because we don't want our pipe cleaner to show through on the top of our bow. And now we're going to give it a really good twist to finish tightening it up. See how our ribbon pinches up and together when we do that? Now what I'm going to do to make this easier to put on my wreath is I am going to take 2 pipe cleaners and I'm going to wrap them together. And I'm going to wrap them all the way around and twist them. And then I'm going to cut the excess pipe cleaner off. We don't need it, and it'll just be in the way. Alright, now I untwisted my pipe cleaner because I want to add ribbon tails. Okay, I really like to have ribbon tails on my bow, and I actually prefer that they come from the underneath of my bow. So we're going to cut one of each ribbon, and we're going to start out with the first one at 16 inches. And then I like each ribbon to stand out, so we're going to go down from there. The next one is going to be 15 inches. Oops, I need to learn how to measure. That should have been 14 inches. Let's try that again. Okay, so this one should be 14 inches. And then our last one is going to be 13 inches. And I stack my tails up in the same way that I made my bow. That way it'll still look all nice and pretty. So like I said, this one's going to be 13 inches. So we are going to stack these up and we're going to even them out. And then we're going to fold these in half to find our center. Like so. And then that's just my little trick. I take my finger and just roll it up. And then we're going to add them into our pipe cleaner. Twist, twist, twist a couple times with our pipe cleaner. And then we are going to dovetail our ribbons before we add our bow to our wreath. Now, probably if you wanted to, it would have been easier to dovetail these before we added them to our bow. So just keep that in mind when you go to make your own bow. Now you're probably asking yourself at this point, how are we going to fluff our bow? And I'm actually going to fluff mine once I put it in my wreath, because there's enough weight on my wreath so that it'll hold my bow still. Now, sometimes getting your pipe cleaners through your mesh is a little bit difficult. So what I use, and you'll see it here in just a second, I use a yarn needle, Y-A-R-N, yarn needle. And you can purchase those at Walmart, Amazon, or you can just use a small crochet hook. It's easier than fighting to get your pipe cleaner down through your mesh. Because as you'll see here, now that I finally got my tool out, you just push it up through the wreath and hook your pipe cleaner in, and it will just pull right through. So now that I got my pipe cleaner down through, we're going to twist, 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 twist to tighten that up. And once we get that tightened up, we are ready to fluff our bow. Now you can pretty much fluff your bow any way that you want to and that you feel comfortable with, but I like starting at the bottom and working my way up. So I start with my tails first. Notice how I'm kind of like pulling on my ribbon. I want it to do what I want it to do, so sometimes you gotta use a little force, and that's just fine. So like I said, I'm getting my tails out of the way first. I'm not really concerned as I do this about fluffing my bow and how it looks just yet. So now I want to start at the bottom and pull my loops apart. Notice how I'm pulling them apart pretty good and alternating them. Like I said, also, I'm not really worried about fluffing my bow necessarily at this point, but I am going to try to kind of put my ribbons where I want them as I go. So you see, I'm only going to do one side at a time. And notice I'm not having any resistance to pulling my loops or anything like that. And that's just why I prefer to fluff my bows on my wreath. So now we're going to go to the other side and we are going to pull our loops apart some more. Now I like to make sure that my loops alternate, that I don't have the same color touching each other. Notice how I'm going to move my watermelon and put my diamond ribbon between my two watermelons. So I could probably fluff a bow for days, rounding out my loops and everything, because I'm pretty picky about how my bow looks. And what I noticed here was that I pulled my bow a little too far into my wreath. So what I'm doing is I'm loosening my pipe cleaner and pulling my bow out just a little bit so that my bow will be fluffier. You will see the difference as soon as I get it tightened back down. All right. So here we go. Now you see the difference. Because it was in my wreath a little too tight, the bow didn't look as big because it was kind of like folding up. So now you can see all the colors and patterns on my bow. And now we're going to get all the ribbons where we want them. And I'm going to take my tails and I'm going to make sure that I alternate them so that the same ones aren't touching and pull them pretty far apart. Your ribbon tails will actually help make your bow look larger if that's what you want to do. However you decide to place them. And there you have it. There is our bow. Now that we have our bow on, we are ready to start putting our finishing touches on our wreath. As you can see, look how beautiful that is. So now we're going to put our watermelon sign on. And how I'm going to put my watermelon sign on, I like my signs to kind of be at an angle. And I really like them to be tucked into my bow just a little bit. So that's what we're going to do. To attach our sign, we're going to use some pipe cleaners. And I like to use pipe cleaners that are the same color as my sign because then they don't stand out. That tool is a metal hole punch. It's available at the jewelry section at Walmart, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, or you can order one off Amazon. And what I do with the metal hole punch is I'm going to punch a hole in it to insert my pipe cleaner. Typically, when I use this hole punch, I try to find a place that's discreet as possible, so that you don't see the pipe cleaner. It just so happens on the back of this sign that there is a hanger for the sign. So we're going to put our first pipe cleaner through that hanger. Not all metal signs have a hanger, but we're going to use this one. So we're going to put our pipe cleaner in and we're going to tie it. And I'm going to get my yarn needle out to help me get the pipe cleaners through. This is one of my favorite things about the Unique and the Creek boards, is because there are so many holes on these boards, you're not limited to where you place your signs as you are with traditional wreath bases. It's a good solid board. Also gives you a really clean backing look. When you're finished. Now I'm not pulling too tightly down on my sign. That's an advantage to the metal signs, is they don't weigh that much. So when you use a metal sign, you don't have to pull it down too far into your wreath. A lot of people have problems with that because they don't like their signs sinking down into their mesh. I don't like my signs sinking down into the mesh either. So as you can see, now I'm going to use my metal hole punch. This metal hole punch is going to punch right through that metal. It's not hard at all, y'all. Doesn't require much hand strength at all. I know me using two hands kind of shows otherwise, but I have carpal tunnel, y'all. So sometimes I just borrow the strength of both hands. But once I get this pipe cleaner on, you're going to see that you don't even see it at all. Like I said, this is a handy little tool. And it just pokes right up through that mesh. Making it super easy to grab hold of those pipe cleaners and pull them through. Now you will notice here in just a second as I pull my other pipe cleaner through, that the sign isn't being pulled too far into the wreath, and it's just sitting nicely on top of the mesh. With a small little adjustment of the sign, fix the ribbons, put them back into place. So what I did here when I was attaching my pipe cleaners is I put them in holes that are basically directly under the sign. The reason that I did that was to make sure that my sign didn't slide down, didn't move up, but was going to stay in place. That's kind of like creating leverage. So let me flip this over and show you how it's sitting nicely on top of the mesh. And there's my bottom pipe cleaner, my top pipe cleaner. As you can see, they are sitting closer together than the actual length of the sign. Now I just want to add a little bit of fun to the wreath. Here's the next step. You don't have to do this, but it sure does add a little bit more fluff to the wreath. Now, I like using leftover mesh to do this. If you've been making wreaths for a while, or you've been buying kits from Unique in the Creek for a while, you probably have some leftover mesh. And this is a really good way to enhance a wreath and use up your leftover mesh stash. So we're going to put some spiral curls into this. So we're going to cut 10 pieces of mesh, and we're going to cut that mesh 10 inches long. So let's set our wreath out of the way and cut our mesh. My mat is 36 inches long, so that makes that super quick, so I can basically roll it out and cut 3 pieces of mesh at one time. And we're just going to roll this up, not too tight. Fold it in half, and then add one to each tie. Roll it up, fold it in half. That just lets you know where center is. Pinch it up and add it to your tie. Let's speed this process up just a little bit. Now you can use a little bit of flex tube through here if you wanted to use flex tube. Typically I cut mine anywhere from 20 to 24 inches. You can also put a little greenery in there with a hot glue gun or just tie it in with the pipe cleaners. Either way, I just kind of choose to use the mesh because it's left over and it's not a fresh product. So it just helps get stuff out of my inventory. Kind of gives me an excuse to go shopping for more wreath supplies if I actually use up all the supplies that I have. So now that we're done with our wreath and we have all our spirals in, go around and we're going to fluff everything back up. And we're going to make sure that we like our design the way it is, get our sign all straight, nice and pretty. Basically I call this getting it ready for its close-up, because once we're done with the wreath, of course we want to take a picture and show it off to our friends. Another place that you can show this wreath off is on Facebook. You can join the Unique in the Creek group on Facebook and show everybody what you have done with the Unique in the Creek boards. Thank y'all so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed this. I can't wait to see the wreaths that you make with the Unique in the Creek boards. Don't forget, you can get all your supplies for wreath making at uniqueinthecreek.com. See you next time, everyone. Bye, y'all.